Hey everybody, it's Mark Vogt with VOGTLAND Outdoors, working on the VOGTLAND shooting method. And I was going over all of the videos that I've been shooting, showing mostly I've been proving how the technique works. I've been telling everybody that it works with any bow, any arrow. But when I was talking this over with my twin brother Michael, hey Mike, he said the one thing you haven't talked about yet, or the one thing I haven't seen in a video yet, is you actually doing it with different bows, with different arrows. And that got me to thinking, the one lesson that I've really not talked about yet is the one critical part that changes from bow to bow, from arrow to arrow, and that is, how do you calibrate the elevation? You've heard me talking about 1 finger, 2 finger, 2.5 finger, 3 finger gaps that change the elevation from the rear of the arrow instead of from the front of the arrow like compound bows have, but you haven't actually seen me do it. So today, on a cold, actually it's Christmas Eve 2019, everybody, on a cold, foggy day in northeastern Illinois, we're actually going to take 3 different bows and we're going to calibrate them. We've got a 40-pound Martin, we've got my 50-pound Darton, smallest recurve bow you're ever going to see, and we've even got an Asian bow. So we're cutting across the whole spectrum here. If I could have found one of my long bows, I'd have used it. We're actually going to try a couple of different arrow types as well. Different weights is what we're really concerned about here, and different spines. And you're going to see the technique that I'm going to use. You're going to see the technique that I use to actually calibrate what your aiming point is for 10 yards, for 20 yards, for 30 yards, for 40, even for 50. And there are limits. There's limits to anchoring under the chin with a really weak bow, 30 pounds, something like this. They're not going to be able to throw an arrow 100 yards, a regular hunting arrow, a regular target archery. This is a regular hunting arrow with a 100 grain head on it. It's simply too much of an angle to try to shoot up. And I can put 2 fingers, sometimes I've even tried 3 fingers over the arrow, on top of the arrow. The technique still works, but it is an awkward feeling, that kind of an angle. So we're going to stick with 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, maybe even out to 40 on these 40-pound bows. So the question is, where do you start? The answer is, you start short like everybody else. That's a 10-yard target out there. You're going to start with your bow. I'll start off with my regular hunting arrows to begin with, and then we're going to adjust for different weights of arrows. And I think we're going to start with my Darton 50-pound bow, but it's only like 42 inches from top to bottom. It's really quite small, really small. And what you're going to do is you're going to start off knocking your arrow in your normal knocking place. Now for a 50-pound bow, I already know from a little bit of experience, I know that for my 55-pound bow, 10 yards is a three finger gap, 1, 2, all the way to 3. So for a 50-pound bow, not quite as much power. It's got to be something just a little bit smaller than that, just a little bit less. So I'm going to start with 2.5, and then I'm going to split the difference on 2.5, and we're going to go to 2 3/4, and that's going to be my starting point. The whole idea here is that we're going to make adjustments 1 rep at a time, or what I prefer to do is to try to split my fingers up. I'm trying to understand in half and in quarter finger increments, sometimes even 1/8 finger increments, what my gap is supposed to be. Why? Because you can't count wraps when you're up in a tree and the deer is walking by, but what you can do is say 1 finger, half a finger, quarter finger, half of that is 1/8. You can do that quite quickly. You can split a finger, split a finger, split a finger, split a finger to get down to 1/8 of a finger widths. And that's going to be enough to be able to correctly gauge what the elevation needs to be for you to take a shot swiftly. So we're going to start there. We're going to start with 2 3/4 for a gap, and we're going to take a shot. I'm going to make sure you're looking over my shoulder, and it actually went way high, shot way up. So now I know I need to make my gap larger. I need to tip the back of the arrow needs to go up which means the gap between my fingers and my arrow knocking point needs to increase to tip the bow up. I'm going to go to a full 3 fingers. Ooh, that looks really good. That was right on line with the black and a little bit left. But don't just take one shot. You're going to take a couple of shots because you're trying to really figure it out. I'm going to go 3 fingers again. Also looks good. I'm going to use all of them because I'm trying to see if there's a pattern that tells me a little bit about my bow. It's looking really good so far. There's a reason why I love this Darton bow for hunting. You can see with this technique, you can actually move very, very quickly. Find that 3 fingers. Plug away. That's all of them. Let's go take a look. Actually, we're going to wait for the guy to call clear. I'm not the only one shooting here today. In fact, I'll keep talking while he's shooting. If we were to pick a different bow, this one is only this is like a 35-pound Asian bow, Mongolian bow. What we're going to find is that I'm going to have a much larger gap, and the distance from Claire. Let's go take a look and see how we did. We're looking for a grouping that tells me there's some consistency in that particular shot. And yeah, we see some really good consistency at 10. So what did we learn? We learned that my 10-yard gap starts. My closest angle, my closest distance is going to start at 3 fingers and start working up. What do we need to do next? We need to find out what's the interval. How big is the interval from 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 to 70, and then go from there. So let me pause and pull these. Okay, we pulled our arrows, and now I know why I shot high on one of those, that very first shot. It's because I wasn't paying attention. I actually had no insert and no head on that arrow. We're going to set that off to the side. Good to know. That means I'm shooting with 5 now to finish calibrating. We've done the first part of calibrating this brand new bow that I've not used before. We know it's a 3-finger gap for 10. We also know it's a 50-pound bow, so what I've learned from experience, and I'll share it with you, it's roughly about a finger width is every 10 yards on a 55-pound bow. I just got done moving the bag out to, it's out at 20 yards now, so my 20-yard gap, I'm going to go up, just to be safe, I'm going to go up only a half a finger width. So this is what it looked like. This is what my gap looked like for 10 yards. This is going to be my 20-yard. I'm going to go for 2.5 and then try it. If I end up short, I'm going to go back up to a full 2 fingers and then work my way up from there. It's all about calibrating and understanding your bow. One thing that you realize right away then, you're going to say, hey Mark, if I'm using the weight of my arrows to try to calibrate what the interval is from any 10 yards, then it's probably important that all of my arrows be as identical as they can possibly be, right? And the answer is a resounding yes, of course. I see people at the range here picking up arrows on the side. They're brand new students. They go and grab all kinds of arrows like people grab golf balls at a golf course. All golf balls are the same. They have to be by the very definition of the sport, but not all arrows are the same. Don't use a mixed bag of arrows. Don't use mixed spines. Don't use mixed lengths. Don't use mixed materials. Don't use mixed feathers. Don't use mixed head weights. You're just hurting your ability to understand what your bow is like. That's like using a different tennis racket on every hit when you're trying to learn how to play tennis. Doesn't make any sense at all. So here we are, trying to shoot at 2.5 fingers to see if that interval of a half of a finger for 10 yards is the right interval. There's my half finger improvement. It's actually a little bit high. Let's do a couple more just to be sure. little high and a little left, but that was me. What I'm going to do is keep shooting at a half a finger at 2.5 fingers to get 5 in there to see if there's a real pattern or if it's just me warming up on a December morning. It's a small bow, but 55 pounds is actually hard to hold back when it's this small. Let's go take a look. Clear? I do see what looks like a pattern. I'm less concerned about the left. That's just me warming up, and what happens is your fingers are stiff. But what I do see is a pattern that everything's just a little bit high. So what I'm seeing here is that I need to somehow change the gap from 2.5 to something much smaller. And we're going to talk about doing that split in just a second. Okay, here we are back at round 3 of calibrating. We've already learned something about this particular bow. We've learned that the 10-yard gap is 3 fingers wide. We've learned that the 20-yard gap is somewhere a little bit wider than 2.5 fingers, just a little bit. Now, you got 2 choices on a bow like this. If you zoom in really close, you can see that what I could do was actually measure 2.5, and if I wanted to, I would count down 1, 2 wraps. I would literally count the wraps at this point. Or an alternative is I count 2.5, then I split my finger to get 2 3/4, then I split backwards and split that. So it actually is 2 3/4 minus 1/8. And that actually goes surprisingly well. It's a consistent, repeatable technique. Either way, we're going to end up with a slightly wider gap than 2 2.5 fingers. So here's my 2.5 fingers. I'm going to count 2 wraps down, and that's going to be my new gap to test. Let's go see how it works. At this point, it's also important that you're really at 10 yards, that your feet are right aligned, that the front of your bow is exactly 10 yards away. Because even taking a half step back or a half step forward is going to change where the arrow lands on the target, plus or minus 2 inches going up or down. That looks really good. Just a hair to the left, but the distance, the elevation, the range was all perfect. Let's try it again. 2.5 plus 2 wraps. Still looking good. Let me get out of your way. I'm liking it. Still looking good. 2.5 plus 2 wraps. Let's go take a look. Clear. That looks pretty good. We're looking for a pretty good grouping that tells us there's a repeatable pattern here. And what we see is that 2.5 plus 2 wraps is actually a really good distance for 20 yards. What's this automatically tell you about changing bows? You change bows, you change arrows, you change lengths of arrows, you change weights on the bow. Everything's got to be recalibrated just a little bit. But overall, the technique starts to fall into a pattern that you start to remember. The best advice I can give you is don't change bows a lot. It is hard to remember those gaps, and there are going to be times when inches, fractions of an inch actually matter in accuracy, and you don't want to just get on the target. So let's pause, pull these. Okay, we're shifting gears now. We've got what our 10-yard mark is. It's 3 fingers. We've got what our 20-yard mark. It's 2.5 fingers plus a 2 wraps. Find it any way that you want. The next one out for any hunter is to be able to shoot out to 30 yards. So we're going to go out there. I'm thinking I got to go up another 1/2 finger. I've got to reduce that gap. And remember, they're reducing the gap at the back. Reducing the gap at the back has the effect of pulling the back of the arrow down. You're changing the elevation so the arrow is aiming higher so it goes farther. We saw that the gap for 10 yards was 3 fingers. The gap for 20 yards was actually 2.5 fingers. So my gap for 30 yards is going to be somewhere around the 2-finger mark. Let's give it a try. Shot left. Fingers are cold. The distance looked good. I missed the bag. 2 fingers. Oh, that was a nice shot. Right on the green dot. Let's go take a look. Well, let's keep shooting. Those are looking really good at 30. This bow loves 30-yard shots. I'd forgotten because it's been about 2 seasons since I used it. Little left, but the distance we'll see, the range was exactly correct. Last arrow. Remember, sometimes my arrows are beat up. So, again, a gap of 2 fingers. I pulled it a little right. Let's go take a look. Clear. Headed out there. You'll notice I'm not cutting as I go out to see the arrows. Other people are skeptical of the technique, so this is what I have to do. That was our 10-yard. Sorry, it's at 20 now. So this is 30. And again, same as always, we're looking for a pattern. And what are we seeing? I was aiming for that little green dot. I actually see a really decent pattern there. Notice the height on all of these arrows is really, really good. So if I'm trying to teach myself what is the gap, what is the gap that provides that particular elevation on the back of the arrow, it's 2 fingers for 30 meters. Over there is our 30-meter mark. So we're already on the right track. What have we said? We said that here in just a span of about 10 minutes, with a bow that I've not used in years, arrows that I've never used inside that bow, I've already got this thing calibrated that I'm hitting with that kind of accuracy at 30 yards. And I'm not using some obscure little technique, instinctively aiming at some point in outer space, that kind of stuff. I'm actually putting the tip of the arrow right smack on the thing I'm trying to hit. That kind of accuracy, the same way a compound archer, he puts his pin on the target. He doesn't put his pin above it, below it, left or right. If he's got a 30-yard pin, he's putting that pin right on the target. With the VOGTLAND shooting technique, the VOGTLAND shooting method, I'm putting the tip of my arrow right on what it is I'm trying to hit. Let's pull these arrows and then go and work out at the 40-meter bag, and we're done. Okay, it's starting to get a little crowded, but we've done, what have we done so far in the last 20 minutes? We found out what our 10-yard gap was for this new bow that I've not shot. It's 3 fingers. We found out that our 20-yard was 2.5 fingers. We found out that our 30 yards was actually a very sweet 2 fingers. So what we're trying to see, what we're seeing here now, is that at least for the shorter distances, it's a 1/2 finger width that changes that grants me 10 more yards, 10 more yards, 10 more yards. So we see that there's a method to this madness. If 3 fingers is 10, 2.5 fingers is 20, 2 fingers is 30, it makes sense that somewhere around the 1.5 finger mark is going to be my 40-yard mark. And there's 40 yards. Now, it's a hunting bow. So I'm not sitting here trying to shoot beyond 40, because really a hunting bow is meant to sit up in a tree, be utterly silent, and if you're lucky, amidst that ocean of oak trees, there's a clear 40-yard shot that you might take at a deer. I think the longest shot I've ever made and I got it. It was about 36, 37 yards. I'm up in a tree stand, and I got the deer, 3 seasons ago in out west of here, about 30 miles, Shabana State Park. So we're going to aim at that 30-yard mark out there with a 1.5 finger gap. Now the VOGTLAND shooting method is not magic. You still have to be rock steady, releasing and trying to hit out there. You have to be super smooth. So if it's cold and your fingers are stiff, you're not going to get a great shot. But what the VOGTLAND shooting method does is give you the confidence that you're aiming at something. You're actually putting the tip of your arrow right on a target, not aiming at some imaginary point out in space. That's what's going to help us. They also, anchoring underneath my chin, allows me to get a very smooth release, so there's not a lot of left to right wobble. You've tried to minimize it as much as you possibly can. Let's take 5 shots out there and see how we're doing. One and a half finger gap. Good distance, left of the target, about 8 inches to the left, up center. So I'm going to keep that distance and keep shooting. Better. Did you see that material is so tight that it actually utterly rejected my arrow coming in at about 250 feet per second. Just popped it right out of the bag. 1.5 finger gap. Not bad, high and right, but I did that. Still not a bad distance. That was me, threw it over. Let's get one more in there. Yeah, pretty good. We'll wait our turn for them to call all clear. We'll go take a look. Next, we're going to go try something completely different. Instead of bringing up my Martin 40-pound bow, which is virtually identical to my Martin Saber, this is just a Martin Jaguar that I got cheap. Next, we're going to try this very same technique on a completely different bow from a completely different part of the world. This one's going to be a Mongolian bow. I think it's only 35 pounds. I hope that string is thick enough to hold on to my nocks. I didn't think to check that. I haven't had the bow that long. But we're going to be using my hand for the arrow rest, and it won't matter. What matters is the arrow, the tip of the arrow, the angle that the string walking that I use to shoot. Clear. Let's go take a look. Again, it's hard to actually talk and show this technique, so there were misses. But what I do want you guys to see is the range, that the distances are surprisingly good. We've got 5 arrows, 4 are on the bag. We see that this is what I was aiming for right here, and we got them within literally plus 4 inches, minus 0 for a distance right there. And then you always get one stray because you're busy talking instead of shooting. That's not bad. Let's go shoot one more round at 40 yards and then see how we're doing. Okay, this is going to be the second round at 40 yards, and then we're going to start working on the Mongolian bow and do the exact same thing. Hope you guys like a long video like this, that you find it useful, because what I want you guys doing is taking your bow and following the exact same technique. I'm going to be a little bit quieter shooting out there now, because like I said, at 40 yards with a small bow, a short bow, everything's got to be right. If I get a little wobble like this, I'll still miss, no matter what your technique is. So here goes. 1.5 fingers. Good distance to the right. This is a bad fletching. Oh, that looked really good. I'm hoping I'm on the right side, you guys can see this. 1.5 fingers. Also, darn good. Guy got the deer, 2 in a row. That's me. I held on too long and I started to shake. Last one. 1.5 fingers. Good distance to the left of the target. A really good distance. I'm happy with that. Just gonna wait for them to call clear. And while that's happening, I may as well test and see if I can knock on this or not. I don't have a knocking point, so what I'm concerned about is whether or not clear. Let's go see how we did. Freckles, say hi. Come on. I can see we're not alone today. Others are out here shooting. And again, what we're looking for is consistency in the range. And actually, that's not bad. They're all very consistent. They're within dead accurate, 2 inches down, about 4 inches to 4 inches up at 40 yards. Would you get the deer if you actually could get it, you know, centered and get a good release? Yeah, you'd have still walked away with that deer. So we're going to pause on this one, and then we're going to tee up the Mongolian bow, and I have to move the bag back to 10 yards. We start all over again. Okay, here we're trying the exact same technique out, but we're using a Mongolian horse bow. I believe it's 35 pounds, so substantially lower. It might be 40. 35 at 10-yard target. So we knew from the last time we shot. The other trick is I don't have a knocking point on this, so I have to try to, oh, and it's moving too. Darn it. That string is too loose for this. It doesn't work. I mean, if you don't have a knocking point and the arrow does this, it's actually quite dangerous to use the technique. So I'm going to have to rewrap this with a little bit of extra serving before we go out and test this. That means the only one I can do is this other Martin 40 pounder. Let's see, this also doesn't have a knocking point, but the string is a lot thicker, and I can fake the knocking point. I mean, it's just one arrow width off of dead perpendicular. I can approximate that. We knew that the 50 pound had a 3-finger gap. We know that this is 40, so it's a safe place to start. 3 fingers. I'm expecting it to shoot actually a little bit low. That is not going to be enough elevation to get to 10 yards, but let's see. You'll notice this one actually has a completely different type of rest on it too. It doesn't matter. The technique is oblivious to all of that stuff. A little loud because I don't have string silencers. I see it up and to the left a little bit. We'll shoot one more. Still a little high. I'm also noticing my brace here is quite small, which means what I need to do is take the string off, twist it to make it shorter, to actually bend the limbs a little bit more to bring this brace out. It should be another 2 inches that I'm getting a sufficient vibration. So I'm going to pause and make those adjustments. Clear.